Our job begins where most advisors stop. Saving money is great, but how do you spend it without risk in retirement? Welcome to Every Day is Saturday with Brad Gotto and Matt Stahl, partners and private wealth managers at Fiat Wealth Management. In this podcast, we aim to broaden your knowledge about the financial world we live in today and make the boring and complex financial decisions fun, informative, and educational. Join us on this journey where Brad and Matt will explore different strategies on how to spend your money without guilt and have peace of mind knowing you are spending it the optimal way in retirement.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Every Day is Saturday. My name is Matt Stahl, and I'm here with my partner, Brad Gotto, and we're super excited to be back with you today. Our topic is super informative and a very, very important thing to be thinking about for a lot of our audience. Before we jump into that, Brad, how you doing, man?
I'm good. It's that time of year where I don't dislike it yet because it's not too cold. But we get a little of the scene change in Minnesota. For those of you that are not from here, is beautiful this time of year, and we're in transition with sports and with the boys at home, and so just enjoying everything right now. How about you?
Same thing. Soccer season wrapped up. We had like a little bit of daylight, I would say, where not every minute of our day was planned out. And I love fall.
Well, not only is soccer season over for your family, but so the listeners know you retired. This is a big deal.
I did retire. Yes.
From being a soccer coach.
Second time I retired. This time it's from competitive soccer. Before it was recreational. So this time it's official.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yep. You heard it here.
Okay. So. Yeah. Now it's going to be on a podcast. So now when the school comes calling again, or the club teams come calling, and be like, I can't, because I told everybody I was going to retire, and I actually recorded it on a podcast. So
I'll reference the podcast. This is true.
That's how you get listeners. Just go listen to the podcast. I promise you.
All right, guys, this is part 2 of a 3-part series that we're covering. And today's topic, we're talking about withdrawal rate risk. So our 3-part series is the 3 biggest risks to retirement. So if you remember last time, we talked about sequence of returns. Today, we're going to be talking about withdrawal rate risk. Brad, what the heck does that mean?
Withdrawal rate risk, Matt, is just referencing the age-old question of how much of my portfolio or my savings can I pull out every single year to live on in retirement? What is the safe amount, or kind of the rule of thumb, if you will, like they'd like to say, that I can pull out of my portfolio every year? And then the risks associated with that, like it talks about, because if this was a for certain number and there was just a right answer, there wouldn't be a withdrawal rate risk. It would just be, what is the rate? And so today we'll discuss kind of what the rates are, but also, and what's been discussed over time, but what the risks are associated with that.
I always explain it. Maybe, I don't know if you do the same thing. Have you had this happen where you're sitting on an airplane and you start talking to somebody and they ask you what you do for a living?
Yes. I mean, usually that means I didn't get my headphones on in time, but yeah.
Right. Well, to be fair, Brad used to travel the country multiple weeks a year. So he had it down to a science, but
yeah, I just started putting them on before I got in the plane.
There you go. Yeah. So just send a message right before you get. So I would often have I would have the experience where you start talking to somebody and they share what they do. They ask you what you do. And once you get into it, the question always evolves into, well, do you think I can retire? You know, especially if you're talking to someone who's in their late 40s, 50s, and the 60s, it's always that same question. Well, do you think I can retire? And it's like, well, I have no idea.
Do you ever ponder, Matt, if it take the same exact scenario, but you're not a financial advisor, you're something else?
Yeah.
And what questions those people get? Like if you're a doctor or you're a lawyer or you're a chiropractor or whatever, you're just in a service type role where you interact with other people, the type of questions that they get, because they've got to be having the same conversation you and I are offline. Like, what did they think I was going to do? Solve all their problems in seat 14B?
Well, but what I do end up going to when I do have that conversation with people, and if they are sincerely asking that question and you break out the proverbial napkin, you know, on the airplane, that's a lot of times where we'll start. I'll say, okay, how much money do you have? How much do you want to spend? Which majority of the time the answer is, I don't know. It's like, well, then I don't know if you can retire.
Wait a minute. These people on these airplanes are telling you how much
In
money they
general,
have.
It's happened for sure. But what most people, if they were to Google something or like a starting point, you'll often hear people talk about the 4% rule, right? So that's kind of been and once we explain where this came from, I'm not so sure everyone's going to have 100% confidence in the 4% rules.
You're not supposed to dig into rules of thumb, Matt. You're supposed to just take them as gospel and run with it.
We have a cast of characters we're going to be referencing today. The 4% rule was actually coined by a guy named Bill Bengen. And so he named this Safe Max. So he even came up with a name for it, which is,
branded it.
Clever. He's a marketing genius, and it's still alive today. But so Bill was a financial advisor, just like you and I. And he decided to throw out the Safe Max rule of 4%. And from what I understand, there wasn't a whole bunch of data that accompanied that. It was, looking through some historical charts and seeing, hey, how did different asset classes perform over time? And based on that, hey, 4% sounds pretty good. And what we were also talking about earlier today is how long ago did he come up with that?
Well, to be fair to William, there's probably a little more.
Are you saying I'm not on a first name basis with them?
I don't know. There's probably a little more math that went into it, but the bottom line is just some guesswork on, okay, if you have this average retirement, a 60-40 portfolio, kind of some boilerplate stuff, really what type of distribution should be looking like. And to put that into perspective for people out there that don't want to do the math, if you've got $1 million portfolio, that's 40 grand a year. That's 4%. Okay. When you look at it that way, $1 million feels like a lot of money, maybe to some people. Even if you have $5 million, it's 200 grand a year. Bottom line is that was the math. And Bengen came up with this about 30 years ago, give or take. I don't have the date memorized, but it's about 30 years ago. But I do remember this, Matt, when you and I were getting into this industry with a big box firm. The firm that we started with, I don't think we need to hide it. We were with Ameriprise. We were taught basically right out of the CFP manual. I mean, that's kind of how they taught financial advising at Ameriprise. And we were taught this. And it wasn't taught as, at least as I remember it, maybe you remember different, but it wasn't taught as, hey, this is a good jumping off point. It was taught as, this is the answer. It's 4%. And so this one independent little advisor, where maybe he was a little, I got to give William.
Geez, now I have to stick up for William.
I know. I'm sorry. But it's crazy how far it went. I mean, you got big, huge firms like Ameriprise and big designations like the CFP saying, this works. But it's also interesting because retirement is really different today than it has been in the past. I mean, people live longer, right? So this modern retirement is a much longer retirement than it has been in the past. And two, pensions are they kind of went the way of the dinosaur. They exist. I guess dinosaurs don't exist anymore, but like pensions are fewer and far between, right? The point I'm trying to make. And so people are being forced to live off of their own assets at a much greater clip than they have in the past. And they're living longer, which is actually episode 3 coming up in a couple of weeks. We're going to talk about longevity. So stay tuned for that. But as far as withdrawal rate is concerned, Bengen, I think it was in 1994, but now that I've recorded that on a podcast, I'm not sure that that's the right date. Somewhere around there.
Don't take that as
somewhere
fact,
around there.
Somewhere in that range. And actually since then, so as I understand it, William Bengen is not a practicing advisor any longer, but I believe has actually come out and he's increased that to the 5% rule.
Yeah, notice how I got you calling him William now instead of Bill.
Yeah. Well, now I felt like I was being disrespectful. I wasn't intending to, but the way, geez, you made me feel like I was really distant.
Yeah. So recently, you're right. He did come out and redid his math. I don't know what assumptions he changed. It was just performance of asset classes or length. So I honestly don't know how he ended up changing his math, but now you're right. He has come out and said he thinks 5% is a safe withdrawal rate.
Just from a math standpoint, why don't you walk us through that?
Yeah. So that $1 million portfolio is now 50 grand instead of 40 grand. Right. And that $5 million portfolio is now $250,000 a year versus $200,000 a year. But regardless, whether it's 4 or 5, what we need to understand about his math is it's not saying that if that's the number that you use, 4% or 5%, that there's 100% guarantee that that's going to work out. In fact, in his original calculations, and I would assume it's the same for today, it was a 90% confidence rate, which is a really fancy way to say in all the stochastic modeling and different scenarios that he ran, probably 1,000 or 10,000 different simulations. Those tend to be kind of the numbers that people use, that it worked out 90% of the time. 10% of the time, that distribution rate resulted in failure, i.e., in his hypothetical scenarios, these people ran out of money. So it's important for people to know that even if they still subscribe to the math that William has used, right or wrong, we're not necessarily disagreeing with him, but just understand there's still a 10% chance you're going to run out of money based on his assumptions.
So that is a rule that a lot of people are familiar with. Which you pick up if you jump on Google, you pick up a newspaper, you're going to see the 4% rule in a lot of places. So it's pretty widespread. But we have another character that's on the other end of the spectrum as far as what that number is. And what's that fellow's name? Wade Pfau.
Wade Pfau.
And I'm gonna do my best not to disrespect Wade because so Wade,
he's a numbers guy.
Wade's a numbers
guy.
His credentials. So he's a program director at the American College of Financial Services, and he's a professor of retirement income. So he's in the weeds. Like he is, really into the numbers, really into the historical figures. And the Wade has come out.
He's a name that if you're in our industry, Matt, he's a name that right? Because the American College, which you just discussed, is basically the master's level, PhD level classes that financial advisors can take for continuing education and all the things. And he's a professor there, and his specialty is retirement income. This is what he does.
So Wade has consistently come out and updated what that safe withdrawal rate is. And we want to share just one of the most recent updates, as you can probably imagine. Well, think in terms of over the last 10 years, yes, we've had some excitement here and there, but we haven't had like a real prolonged recession that we've all felt, on a real level. So the closest thing we've had to that is really with COVID in March of 2020. So I would expect him to have been on the ball and said, hey, based on where things are at today, what is the safe withdrawal rate? And so as of March 2020, Wade did come out and say that the safe withdrawal rate was 2.4%. And now just in perspective to think about this, William Bengen is saying, hey, if you have $1 million, you can pull out $50,000 a year. And Wade over here is saying $24,000 a year. That's a huge difference when you think of it in those terms. Like, just from the standpoint of monthly spending, that's a huge difference. There's 100% difference. That you really feel. So
I like 5 way better. William sounds like way more fun to me.
Gosh. Wade, geez.
Wade's not the fun guy at the party. He's not living the everyday Saturday lifestyle.
We need Wades in our life.
We do. There are certain times that you invite Wade to the party when you need to ride home.
What I think is really interesting about Wade's observation, we have this, Brad, you and I have this conversation often, and we end up then having the same conversations with clients, is so the way that Wade approaches is he looked at one particular day. So I don't even know what the day was, March 2020, when every financial market we saw a correction in, every financial market. So there's not really a safe place to hide. And so, of course, if you're going to look at how things stack up that particular day, everything's going to look pretty grim, right? So the way that we've talked about this and the way that we have that conversation with our clients is that's like a photograph in time. So think of going to watch a full-length movie. Your financial life is a full-length movie. To stop and take a photograph at one point is just a snapshot in that whole long journey. So of course, you can pinpoint certain times where it says, hey, on this particular day, based on where everything is at, it's at 2.4%. What I would have been really curious to see is when we saw everything come back so swiftly, how quickly that had come back. And I don't think that he did publish that, but that would have been a really interesting thing to see was, where was that 2.4 tracking when we did see the financial markets come back very, very swiftly?
No, I have followed Pfau in some of his studies and math over the years, obviously being intimately involved in this world. And the lowest I've seen it published in a study, I think it was published in the Wall Street Journal, but don't quote me on that either. But I think it was 1.8%. I've seen it as low as 1.8. The bottom line is the number could be all over the map, depending on how you choose to formulate your Excel spreadsheet and where we're at and what the markets look like and kind of what's going on in the economy around us.
That's it, the unique, and just from a statistics standpoint, just a couple different things that we had chatted about before this was, so when we're talking about, when we look at different things, we're using some generalizations. So we're making some assumptions, but a 60-40 portfolio, which just means 60% stocks, 40% bonds. Normally, and in this particular case, what we mean when we say 60% stocks, it means large cap US stocks. Okay. So that's, big US companies, big established companies.
Think Apple, Netflix, Google, Amazon, Facebook.
So 40%, that other 40% is intermediate government bonds. So you're cutting out
Matt, what is an intermediate government bond? That's a mouthful. It sounds very Wade Pfau-ish.
It's very Wade Pfau. So,
that does not sound like our friend William.
So
the fun guy.
What the official definition is from, I believe it's 1 year to 10 years is what's considered intermediate.
Government bonds.
So government bonds. So keep in mind, we're cutting out a whole swath of corporate bonds and,
sure. We have to make assumptions, right? We're going to have a broad conversation like this. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah. So, but looking at that, if I was going to really boil this down and keep it super simple, the worst 30-year time frame. So we're going to talk about longevity risk next time, but a retirement of 30 years, the worst 30-year stretch we've seen from 1920 to today was 6.28%.
So Matt, what you're saying is that 60-40 portfolio that you just got done describing in a rolling 30-year look based on the last 100 years, the worst it ever performed on average over a 30-year rolling time frame was 6.28%.
6.28%. Yep.
Okay. Then how in the world, even if I'm William Bengen and I'm the fun guy, can I only pull 5% from my portfolio? That doesn't seem to make sense.
Right.
At first blush.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, going back to what we talked about last time when we dug into sequence of returns.
Yeah.
So this is where it gets fascinating.
Wait a minute. You're telling me these things tie together?
Yeah, I know. Pretty clever, huh?
Yeah.
So how those things do tie together is, keep in mind, that's making an assumption that we have a 60-40 portfolio that's just sitting there, right? So again, we're kind of peeling another layer of the onion back. We talked about this earlier, but we have several clients that are super, super intelligent, scientists and engineers and people that I'd put way above us from an intelligence standpoint, that as you start digging into this stuff, they are just fascinated by, how many different layers there are. Because you look at it and on the surface, common sense, you say 6.28%, of course, 4% is a safe withdrawal rate. It's like, well, guess what? It didn't just do 6.28% consistently over that whole time. And let's put a big
sequencing matters.
Yeah.
Inflation
put a
matters.
big distribution in there somewhere. You were taking money out, and you were taking money out when the market was down.
Taxes.
So, yeah. So it's while we do like to simplify things because it helps people understand it, the reality is it's a lot more complicated than we might think on the surface. And as you continue to dig into that, it just becomes more and more complex.
So what do you
Yeah.
do, right? Like your average Joe or Jane retiree, and you're trying to figure out after listening to a podcast like this, well, do I subscribe to the Wade Pfau way of the world? Do I subscribe to the William Bengen way of the world? Do I do something in between? Where do you start?
Question. So we presented the problem. What's the solution, right? Well, there's a couple different things that we look at to address sequence of returns, to address withdrawal rate risk. You've heard the word diversification. If Brad didn't know the word diversification, he all should just hit pause and exit right now. But if you're listening to a podcast related to financial planning, you've heard that term before. So diversification, make sure that you have different asset classes that are going to behave differently, so you don't ride the boat all the way down and one can balance out another. So the thing is, when we say that word, what most people go to is investment diversification, which I just did the same thing. So it's, well, I want to hold some large US companies. I want to hold some small companies. I want some bonds because they supposedly behave differently than stocks. That's the investment.
Although the last 2 times the market's gone down, that's
Right.
not been true, but
in theory,
typically, right?
Yeah. So we have investment diversification, which is where most people go first. But as you know, the almost more important thing is time diversification and tax diversification. So I sit down with somebody that has $2 million and they say they want to spend, $30,000 a year. In reality, it is faulty thinking to look at this $2 million chunk of money and assume that that's all going to be invested the exact same way. So as you know, where we start is going to be time diversification. It's, hey, when are we going to spend this money? And if we're going to spend this money within the next 2 years, we sure as heck aren't going to take a bunch of risk with it, right? Which starts to spill into the investment side. So it's thinking about the nest egg and silos of when we're going to spend that. And if we invest the money that we're going to spend in the next 3 years, the same as we do in the 30 years plus, we're not doing our job properly, nor are we helping the clients at all. If you look at those 2 different silos, they are going to look much, much different. So that's one way that we address withdrawal rate risk, sequence of returns risk, is to just smooth that out, right?
Yeah. And it's important to note, Matt, in a practical matter, everybody's buckets relative to what they need now, what they need soon, and what they need kind of down the road or later are very, very different. We got families that we work with that their now bucket of money is really big because at their retirement, maybe they retired early, they have no Social Security yet, no pension, no nothing. And so that entire paycheck is on them. Or we have clients too that in retirement are transitioning homes, all these things. And so they've got kind of these one-off expenditures, kind of a lot going on right away, big life changes. And so that now bucket's really big. We've got other clients that at retirement, the second they retire, that Social Security check is on, they've got a pension, whatever. And so their now bucket's really small. It just doesn't need to be very big because from a cash flow perspective, there's really not a lot coming out today. Maybe they want to buy a house in 5 years, but that's not now money, that's soon money. And so determining from a cash flow perspective, kind of the ebbs and flows of what your cash flow is going to look like is really going to help determine what needs to be in the now, soon, and later buckets and how much, and then figuring out how to position that money from a time perspective is really, really important. So investment, we talked about already. Time. The other one, Matt, that we talk about all the time here at Fiat, and we ring this bell constantly, is taxes. And just making sure that you don't have all of your money in a bucket that you've never paid taxes, or you don't have all of your money in a bucket that you've already paid taxes. Because at the end of the day, we don't know what's going to happen with taxes. We all have our guess, right? I'm not going to give away what I think is going to happen to taxes, but we all have our guess on what's going to happen. And so same thing, positioning money from a tax perspective, where some of it's we've paid off the IRS, some of it we still owe the IRS, and just making sure we've got some diversification that way can help. But here's the next question then, and kind of the final question as we wrap this up. All that being said, so we've invested on the it perspective, investments, time, taxes. We've done that. What's the safe withdrawal rate?
Does anybody really know? So
I know I asked you an impossible question. I did it on purpose. The answer is we have families here that withdrawal rate is above 7. And we have families we work with that's below 2. The other risks in your life, again, Social Security could be part of that. How much you want to spend? Do you have a pension? Do you have any other guaranteed income coming in the door? What does your situation look like? Wade Pfau isn't right and he's not wrong. The answer is there is no right or wrong answer. It really, really does depend. The best thing you can do for yourself as a listener to this podcast is understand the risks that you're comfortable with and the ones that you're not. Matt, last week we had the opportunity to have a guest speaker come into our office. And one of the things he said that I thought was great, it was a great analogy, was there's a monster in the closet. You just need to understand what the monster is. And as long as you're okay with that, then you can kind of live your life the way that you want to live your life. And the monster in these situations is the unknown of how much to draw, what's going to happen to inflation, how am I going to live, like all these unknown questions. And if we can start to determine some of these things, understands the risks that you're comfortable with, because there's always going to be some risk, it can help you determine, what that withdrawal rate is going to be or need to be for you and your family.
And it's a moving target, right? Might not be the same thing this year as it is next year. And again, that's why we talk about this is a film, not a photograph. It's going to be a moving, evolving thing all the time.
So if you take anything away from this as we close, guys, you can be a Wade Pfau person. You can be a Bill Bengen person. Just make sure that whatever conclusion you come to is based on your certain set of facts and it actually matches your life, right? Because I can be a Ferrari guy through and through, but if I've got 4 kids and I'm in the throes of it, that doesn't really match the outcomes that I need in my life. And so as always, remember that we're in the middle of a series, by the way, before I get to the close. This is podcast number 2 of 3 in this series, the 3 largest risks to retirement. In the last episode, we covered sequence of returns risk. This time, this withdrawal rate risk. We've got one left. We're going to discuss longevity and how that can affect your overall financial plan and how to solve for this idea that you don't know how long you're going to live. And to tease it a little bit, Matt, we were talking about this earlier today. Isn't it interesting how much time, energy, and effort goes into people choosing the day they're going to retire and how little goes into thinking about when it's going to end? Because any good plan has a beginning date and an end date, right? With that said, thanks for listening to Every Day is Saturday. If you want to reach out to us, you can always find us at our website, www.fiatwm.com. Everything is there. The podcast is there. About our firm is there. Scheduling visits with us is going to be on that website. So you can get all that there. Subscribe to the podcast if you have not already, so you don't miss an episode. And we would absolutely love it. Biggest compliment ever if you would share this with your friends and your loved ones. As always, guys, I'm Brad Gotto. This is my partner, Matt Stahl, and we will see all of you next Saturday.
But we don't record the podcast on Saturday, man.
I don't know when this joke's going to get old, but I guess we're going to keep doing it. Every day is Saturday, Matt.
Aha.
Thank you for listening to Every Day is Saturday. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Fiat Wealth Management or Foundation's investment advisors. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.
Investment advisory services offered through Foundations Investment Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor.